Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Garry Pierre-Pierre.
And I'm Vianora Vinca. Candidate Barack Obama made his opposition to the war in Iraq a centerpiece of his presidential campaign. Now the region is waiting to see if President Obama will make good on his promises about Iraq and the rest of the Middle East.
On this edition of Independent Sources, we talk with an Iraqi journalist and a journalist from Jordan about how people in their countries are reacting to the Obama victory. We looked at the challenges facing African-American newspapers. Will they benefit from an Obama bump? And we profile Claire Chen, an award-winning journalist for the Chinese language daily World Journal.
But first, the Obama presidency, the war in Iraq, and the repercussions for the region. Joining us to discuss these issues is Alaa Majeed. She is from Iraq and works in New York with the Committee to Protect Journalists. She is also the international journalist in residence at the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. Also with us is Rana Sweis. She is a journalist from Jordan and has been writing a blog about U.S. presidential politics. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Rana, I'd like to start with you and ask you what have been some of the reactions in the Arab media to the Obama win?
Well, on the whole, it's been quite positive. There's more optimism in the region. We're really at a turning point in the region in terms of the Middle East peace process, in terms of Iraq and the rest of the region and the process of democratization. So people are sort of waiting and seeing what President Obama will do in the near future.
And Alaa, you said that some people in the Middle East see Obama as a black George Bush. Talk to us more about this statement you made on a panel discussion recently.
I'm not going to talk about the Middle East as a whole. I covered also the Iraqi press for United Press International. So I read the Iraqi newspapers every day. And I saw, through the elections campaigns, how Iraqis reacted to that. Although they see it positive and they see it like good for the region, for the world, for the United States, for the economy, for the war in Iraq and all that, they still think that it is going to take a long time for Obama to fix the problems inside the U.S. and then, move on to to deal with the war in Iraq and, with Iran, for example, and Syria and the entire region. However, most people think that that he won't be able to do that much different than the old administration. That, they always say it is an agenda that is set up, put on the table, and it's just like a matter of changing people. So, yeah, that's what they think.
Rana, what have you been hearing about Rahm Emanuel as being the chief of staff? What do the Middle Easterns say about this nomination?
We are at a very crucial point in the Middle East peace process when it comes to the Palestinians and Israelis. In fact, in a few years only, reality on the ground will not permit us to have a two-state solution. So really the people in the Middle East, especially Jordanians or Jordan, which hosts around 60% of its population are of Palestinian origin, are waiting to see if Obama will, take a lead in the Middle East process as soon as he takes office.
Speaking of diplomacy, Barack Obama made the war in Iraq, ending it, one of his top priorities. On Sunday, the Iraqi cabinet passed overwhelmingly this legislation to withdraw troops by 2012. First of all, is that feasible? And how do people on the ground in Iraq, in the region, feel about this timetable set by the Iraqi cabinet?
They do want to have that done as soon as possible. There is still some political parties who are opposed to. You're talking about the status of forces agreement, right?
Yes.
The SOFA.
Yeah, SOFA.
I mean, it has a lot of articles in it that, for example, allows U.S. forces, and by that they mean like all the civil engineers and private security companies not to comply with the Iraqi law. And this is something like Iraqis had to deal with for the last 5 years, like crimes committed by private companies and U.S. citizens, and they don't comply to our law, they don't comply to the U.S. law, and so they just get away with whatever crime they have. So that is something really highly considered in Iraq, and I don't think that many people are happy with it. On the other side, there are a lot of political parties that are very opposed, that they started, we have political parties that are allied with the religious parties outside the government. And so, for example, Muqtada al-Sadr, Shiite leader of the Mahdi army militia, announced last week that if the SOFA was passed, he has already formed a sort of a militia, an entire militia consists of Shiites, Sunnis, and all people who are opposed to this agreement, that they start fighting the United States forces.
The sooner that the U.S. pulls out, civil war will ensue? Other factions will come and fight against each other?
Well, no, that's they are talking about if the SOFA was passed. So as soon as if it was signed and if it was passed, the deadline is 31st of December. Then, so a lot of people expect that violence will increase. The cabinet passed it because they are, the U.S. proxies, so not that many of them are opposed to the U.S. policy. So it is, many people think it will pass, but violence will increase.
Rana, what are the consequences for Jordan?
I think the consequences are enormous. We are geographically located in the middle of the Middle East, let's say. We are neighbors to Israel, the West Bank, Syria to the north, Iraq to the west. We since the beginning of the war, we received 500,000 to 700,000 Iraqis. This in a country where...
These are refugees?
These are people who left Iraq either on their own terms or they had to flee Iraq, especially after the Samara bombings in 2006. So the consequences are enormous. This in a country of 6 million people that constitutes to almost 10% of the population. This in a country where we have no natural resources, so it's a very delicate situation. And
is the United Nations helping Jordan cope with this crisis, if you will?
Yes, UNHCR, or the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, has taken a lead in Jordan, along with the government of Jordan, to help the Iraqis that are there now. We also have to remember that there are almost 1 million Iraqis in Syria, which also is really struggling with the Iraqis there, who are actually more poor than in Jordan. So the consequences in the region are enormous, and we are hoping for, first of all, a Middle East peace, and also for the situation in Iraq to subside, or the violence at least to subside, and for the Iraqi people to live in peace.
What do you hear about the prospect of Hillary Clinton being this administration's Secretary of State? Is there any buzz about it?
Well, again, I'm just gonna have to say that we're gonna have to wait and see, because we don't know what to expect. There is, in general, more optimism in the region, more of hopefully taking the path of diplomacy rather than violence. So really, the nominations, I can't really comment on them at this point, because we'll have to see if President Obama sticks to his words on promoting Middle East peace. So we'll have to wait and see.
And Hillary Clinton was one of those who voted for the invasion of Iraq.
Exactly.
And called Obama's talks during the campaigns about talking and negotiating with Iran as dangerous and naive, and yet she is now going to be in this position. So it's like a very critical situation that now, more people be like, okay, see, we told you, we told you things are not going to be as everybody hopes.
So it's not changed, it's Clinton 3 or is it Obama 1? Which one do you think it is?
What
is this a continuation of Bill Clinton's? Or is this a beginning for Obama? You don't seem to think that this is a fresh start.
Well, I mean, that's what people think. It is not a fresh start. I mean, like with all of that, what does it mean? Like if Obama says, I'm going to negotiate, yet he's now putting his hand with the person who said, this is dangerous and naive. And also like the issue about Israel, I don't think during the campaigns, Barack Obama was more supportive of the Palestinian case more than his support for Israel, and that is like much of the concern of a lot of people.
Yeah, I have to say I was quite surprised with President Obama's picks for his cabinet, because I didn't.
Emanuel is chief of staff.
I didn't really expect him to choose so many from the Clinton administration. This came as a shock to me. So
is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I'm a bit shocked because he had this whole his whole campaign was on this new change and whatnot. But again, we'll have to just wait and see.
In the last few seconds that we have left, I would like you to respond to this question in a few words, if possible. Alaa, what is the first thing that you would like Obama to do for your region? In 3 or 4 words.
Pulling out the troops, construction.
And Rana?
I'd like to see a secure, viable, independent Palestinian state and a secure Israel as well. The first thing I'd like to see.
Alaa Majeed, Rana Sweis, thanks for being with us. Now here's Abi Ishola with some other news.
Thanks, Vianora. Here's a look at some headlines from New York's ethnic media. Bronx News reports that Councilman Larry Seabrook was reluctant to support 3 term limits for city officials. He says such restrictions prevent people of color from moving up the political ladder. From Caribbean Life, one Brooklyn woman escaped death after a boat accident left her floating between the coasts of Suriname and Guyana. The 48-year-old clung to a plastic bucket for 36 hours to keep herself from drowning. From the Irish Echo, the President of Ireland recently launched a telephone helpline for Irish seniors in New York. Elderly volunteers from 2 Irish community groups will run the Senior Helpline Project. The service is designed to provide comfort to other seniors who may be lonely. And finally, editors at the Amsterdam News are calling November 5th a historical day for the 100-year-old paper. Hundreds waited in line to purchase the issue. The edition featured a glossy poster of the president-elect on the cover. 35,000 copies were sold in a matter of hours. Those are just a few headlines from New York's ethnic media. Back to you, Gary.
Thanks, Abby. That last News of the Week item leads right into the next segment of our show, where we're going to talk about the state of African American newspapers today. Here to join us in our discussions are Elinor Tatum, publisher of the Amsterdam News, and Milton Allimadi, editor-in-chief and publisher of Black Star News. But before we do that, let's look at this report filed by Anjanette Levert about the challenges facing the African American press.
20 years ago, the New York Times published an article about the city's African American newspapers. Their greatest challenge then was advertising, and it still is.
It is a constant struggle. There's no getting around it. It's a struggle centered around advertising, sales.
Our Time Press is a weekly newspaper that covers the happenings in central Brooklyn. Greaves and his wife and partner, Bernice Green, started the paper in 1995 to encourage growth in local black businesses.
Our bread and butter is our small advertisers, small businesses. But you can't charge them the kind of rates that would allow you to do health care, do distribution properly, to hire reporters, to hire staff. To do that, you need to have the corporate advertising.
African American newspapers find themselves in a catch-22 to get the corporate advertisers. Advertising equals revenue, equals talented staff, equals quality of paper, equals readers, which hopefully leads to more and better advertising. According to Black Enterprise magazine, by 2010, Black consumers will spend almost $1 trillion annually. So why aren't the papers benefiting from this? Greaves says big corporations don't see the need to advertise with them. And that's probably because the newspaper most read by African Americans in New York City is the mainstream newspaper, the Daily News. But Milton Allimadi, publisher and founder of the Black Star News, sees things differently. He says his paper questions the establishment and makes corporate advertisers uncomfortable.
When you're engaged in that kind of journalism, it's a tremendous challenge to expect that you can also get support from corporate advertisers.
Questioning the establishment is also the motive for the first African American newspaper in the country, Freedom's Journal. Started in New York City in 1827, this paper began a century and a half of black newspapers with healthy readerships.
Before the civil rights movement, all blacks were reading black newspapers because you hardly see a story in the white newspapers about blacks.
William Egyir has spent most of his career at African American newspapers. He reminds us that all the black intellectuals used to write for the papers and blames the demise on integration.
Best black talents, most of the time, recruited by white newspapers. Young people who come on internship on black newspapers, they will always say, I want to go to television, I want to work for Washington Post or the New York Times, because that's where the money is.
However, the internet could be a chance for this industry's survival.
You can't fight it. Don't try to swim upstream. Go with it, go with it.
Our Time Press has claimed its stake on the World Wide Web, but is cautious of the excitement.
The problem is, how do you make money on the internet? That's a problem for a small paper.
The other problem with news on the net is the need to diversify coverage to attract a younger audience.
There's no reason why a newspaper cannot have substantial entertainment coverage section and have hard news at the same time.
Black news will have to re-examine what is news and give it to them.
Despite a future filled with more challenges, African American publishers and editors still see the need for the advocacy journalism that's been their hallmark.
I could make a lot of money writing for the Post, New York Times, and all that thing, and all those organizations. But we have unfinished work here in the black community.
Anjanette Levert for Independent Sources.
Elinor, last week you had to reprint about 50 to 100,000 newspapers because of demands of the Amsterdam News. Do you think Obama presidency will usher a new era for African American press?
I really hope so. Having to reprint the newspaper so many times this past week, what it has done is it's opened the eyes to a lot of people that may have not bought the Amsterdam News in years, maybe even decades. And I think that resurgence of them buying the paper may be an indication that maybe they will continue to be interested in what we have to say and what we have to write. I'm hoping that the black press will be the go-to when it comes to the Obama presidency, whether it be good or bad, but where they'll be able to have the highest level of discussion within the black community about the first black president.
Milton?
Yeah, I concur with Elinor totally. I think I actually heard the buzz about how the Amsterdam News was selling like hotcakes, so I decided to go and get online myself, even though I had some friends that I could have called. I wanted to taste that experience, so I lined up and I bought a whole stack. And I guess maybe you ran out of it because people are calling me looking for the Amsterdam News, and I've had to part with 5 of my precious copies. But yeah, on a more serious note, I hope that we do become the media of record, because we've already seen some of the nastiness that we'll probably see a lot more of coming from the right-wing press. A person like Rush Limbaugh is already blaming Barack Obama for the recession and perhaps a looming depression by calling it the Obama recession. And this is a man that's not even been sworn into office. So we hope to provide that counterbalance. We'll be critical when we need to, but we'll call out people like Rush Limbaugh when we need to as well.
So, Elinor, in terms of the coverage that you think will be increased, are you planning on covering Washington, having somebody at the White House for the Amsterdam news?
Well, unfortunately, as Willie Egyir said in the last segment, that we don't have the resources that many people would like to have. We don't have bureaus all over the country, all over the world. We do have reporters in places all over the United States, and we do have other newspapers that we do work with. So while we will probably not have someone permanently down there, we will have stringers, freelancers, and other newspapers within the black press that we can count on to get some of those stories that we need. And on certain occasions, like the inauguration, yes, we will have reporters down there because we need to see this firsthand for ourselves.
I want to add on to that. I'm hoping for a lot more, actually. There's no reason why a paper like the Amsterdam News that's been around for 100 years should not have, almost 100 years, should not have the resources, or the Black Star for that matter. We are hoping that we'll see some changes in terms of the advertising coming out of Washington. The federal government spends billions of dollars in advertising. There's no excuse for the Amsterdam News and the Black Star News to not get a substantial part of that share. And that will enable us to deploy resources and deploy reporters in Washington, D.C., and have bureaus like other regular newspapers.
You know, while they talk about women and minority-owned businesses, Milton is absolutely right. The fact is that the black press does not get its fair share of federal advertising, even though we are minority and women-owned businesses.
And talking about advertisers, Milton, how do you plan to get the advertisers to come to your paper?
This momentous election of Barack Obama has given us an opportunity to be strategic. So, for example, we will also be putting out a special inauguration issue, and we hope that advertisers will be able to see this issue. We'll make sure that they get copies of our media plan and our media kit, and maybe meet with them on an individual basis and make a stronger case that we deserve the advertising. And we'll also be able to finally present to them stories that we've covered in the past, stories that we actually broke exclusively, that some of the so-called mainstream newspapers never even had in their publications.
And in addition to that, with the Amsterdam News, after that gangbuster edition that we did, we actually got some calls from advertising agencies that had always never returned our calls. And they started paying attention. So I think they're taking notice now that the black press is viable and is a place to go because the black community does count on us.
What have been the challenges facing the African American press in the past?
Well, of course, it's not getting enough advertising. It's getting wonderful young reporters that you train up and then they leave to go to the New York Times, the Daily News, and newspapers all across the country. But, you know, in some ways, I see it when those writers go to the New York Times and the Daily News, I say, you know what, we did a good job. We trained them well. We've got a good product here, and they want our reporters. So in some ways, it makes me feel good, but at the same time, I feel sad that we no longer have them. But then we just have to do it again. But we are creating the next generation of great black journalists, and they're starting in the black press. And they can never deny that their first bylines were in papers like the Amsterdam News and Black Star News.
Right. In addition to that, I want to add that we also have to push a little bit when it comes to the political aspect, because a lot of these other so-called mainstream publications, they get play on local TV, for example, like New York One, and that makes some impact. I don't understand why occasionally, for example, on the election issue, why don't you call the publisher of the Amsterdam News or the Black Star News to make relevant commentary?
You have independent sources now.
Thank you. Well, that's one. We need a bit more. So those are the kind of things that also elevates your name recognition, and advertisers definitely see that as well.
Thank you. We'll have to leave it at that. Elinor Tatum, Milton Allimadi.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. We'll be right back after this break.
You promised me the world. Is this what you had in mind?
Help EarthShare and its members restore balance to the world. Visit earthshare.org and see what you can do. EarthShare, one environment, one simple way to care for it.
We end our show with a profile of Claire Chen. Chen is currently city editor of World Journal, a Chinese language daily. But for 6 years, she was a general assignment reporter, juggling coverage of City Hall, education, immigration, and any other story important to New York's Chinese community. Zyphus Lebrun reports on a day in the life of this award-winning journalist.
Claire Chen is working double time today. While waiting to cover a community board meeting in Chinatown, she is conducting an interview for another story. This woman's brother was killed in Los Angeles a few weeks earlier. She's hoping that an article in the World Journal will garner enough attention to get her brother's widow and daughter into the country to attend his funeral.
They needed someone like councilmen or senators, anyone who can write a letter for them to make sure they can come here, make sure they can get a visa, because it's really hard for them to get a visa to come here.
The woman asked that her face not be shown to protect her identity. It's not the first time one of Chen's interview subjects has requested anonymity.
They are afraid, especially because they have no status. Sometimes it's harder for them to talk to us. They're afraid that something's gonna happen to them.
Frightened immigrants are one of the hurdles Chen has faced since she began covering such stories out of New York's Chinese community in 2002. She's also had to deal with uncooperative city and government agencies that have hamstrung her reporting.
Hey, Inspector, how many cops are you going to put for the Central New York?
It changes, so on a weekday it's less, on weekends it's more.
And by the way, are you going to... Sometimes they give us a hard time, like they don't respond to the call. They say they are busy, they ask me to email them the questions, but they never really respond to me directly.
Even without the callbacks, Chen has managed to make her name walking her regular beat as the Journal's education reporter. A recent immigrant to the U.S. herself, the Taiwanese national moved here to study at Emerson College in Boston. She knows firsthand how education helps new immigrants assimilate.
Most of Chinese people, they want the kids to have a better education. That's why they come to America. So they really need more information or resource how to help the kids. Sometimes my friends say, oh, it's boring, you cover education issues. But all the parents come to me and they collect my newspaper, my articles, and they ask me all the questions. In some way, it's like a social work.
Sometimes Chen's work sparks her to be a community champion. In that regard, she's earned respect from her peers. In 2005, the Independent Press Association recognized Chen's article.
Best Investigative News Story Division B. Second place, Chinatown's Pockets of Votes That No Candidate Can Afford to Miss by Chi Yi Chen, World Journal.
I talked to a lot of Chinese community leaders. They told me like about 10 years ago, no politicians want to come to Chinatown. They don't want to talk to them about their opinions about how to improve the life in Chinatown. But 10 years later, everything changed.
Changed because first and second generation Chinese no longer see themselves as apathetic outsiders. Though she's happy with these political strides, Chen says her main audience remains the new immigrant struggling to navigate New York.
When they talk to me, I wish I could help them. It's never make me tired because you see the needs. And I wish we can do a lot of good stories so to get the mainstream media's attention to help them as well.
That's our show. Thanks for watching and join us again next week.
In the meantime, be independent-minded.